Today we are off to sort of Greece, sort of not Greece. We're off to see the Milesian school. And I thought today, as a slight change, I might get some of you to answer some questions, because today, the real topic today is 3-4 philosophers who are the earliest, or some of the earliest philosophers in, in history. Yeah. Yes, you are muted. Yes. I hope so. Either that or my ears aren't working. But yes, you should be muted is the plan. Just so that I can deliver all the stuff. There you go. Remember though, and if this is your first time, there is a chat box there, which you can talk to me. I can see your messages, but other people cannot see them. Yeah. Sorry, Izzy. Yeah, it's just to me is the idea. So your video should be off. Your mic is off. I can't see you. The idea is, because this is a webinar, not a standard lesson, the idea is that you can see me and you can hear me. I can read what you put in the chat, but other people can't. So if you have a direct question to me, please do put it in there. There's also a question and answer box, which I use as well. I'm not quite sure how to use that to its best abilities, but you know, I have tried it. Yeah. So yes, that's the way it goes. So yes, for those of you who are new, and I know there are a fair few new people today, the idea behind these webinars are to give you an outline. Every 2 weeks, I do a webinar. On 1 week, we'll do a big idea, usually from religion or a concept, and then the other one that we'll do each month will be on a particular philosopher, or in this case, a few philosophers together, because they're all part of a group. There you are. Oh yes, Rebecca, it says all panelists can see it, but there's only one panelist, which is me. So I don't know. That's just how it goes. Yeah, it's a weird system. I don't know. All right. So just to lay out where we're going today, we're going to start with this place behind me, the city of Miletus, which is part of the Greek world, but not in Greece. Yeah. We're going to have a look at the world's first credited philosopher, a guy called Thales, founder of the Milesian school. Now, if you are looking at our heading here, Milesian school, and thinking, oh, it's about a school, that's not quite how it goes. It's actually, a school is a group of philosophers. Think of philosophers like fish. They hang around in schools, which means that a school of philosophy often crops up in a certain place. The Milesian school all starts up in the same small town, which is why that gets its name, the town of Miletus. Sometimes schools are a bit bigger than that, and they work across generations and time and locations. So you might have a wide school like, I'm trying to think of some that are wide now, like the existentialist school. Some of them would never have met each other because some of them were dead and they all lived in different places, but you can put them together as a school of thought. And so the school we're looking at today, not a physical building. We're not going to look at the classrooms and stuff. We're looking at a group of Greek people who had the same kind of ideas. In fact, one was the teacher of the next, who was the teacher of the next. So there we go. We'll go through these three. So we're going to go and we're going to have a look at Thales first, because he was the founder, the first ever philosopher. We're going to have a look at the concept of monism or monism. We're then going to have a look at our second member of the school, Anaximander, he of the thinky hand on my screen there. We're then going to have a look at his theory of the boundless. Then we're going to look at Anaximenes, who I find it really hard to say, so I'm sorry if I butcher his name too much, but he's the third member of the school. And then, because, well, I like it, we are going to take a short trip up the road to someone who's not technically part of the Milesian school, and we're going to Ephesus to meet a philosopher there as well. There you go. So, I don't want to zoom out, I want to go down. All right, let's start with the city of Miletus then, and why this is an important place. Now, Miletus, you can see it just down here. Let me get my pen out. You can see Miletus down here on the map. If I can move my pen around, here it is. It's part of the Greek world, but this is not Greece, this is Turkey. Yeah, so to give you an idea of where this is, here's Athens and here's Sparta, two very famous Greek cities. Miletus is a fair way away from there, but still part of the Greek-speaking world. So we're talking about people that speak the same language. They have the same, what do we call it? The same culture, the same religion. They would have understood each other pretty well. The Greek world, stretched further than just Greece, basically. So, and the first guy we're going to look at, he comes from this town, and it occurs at quite an important place, a place in history. There's a reason there were no philosophers before this, at least ones that we know about, and that's because people were pretty busy. For most of history, up to where we are about 2,500 years ago, human beings are having a real hard job just surviving. Hunting, gathering, hunter-gathering, that kind of thing. And they're so busy that they haven't got time to sort of sit around and think or contemplate. It takes a certain kind of society where you've got agriculture going on, people are growing food in the fields, you've got, specific people going off and doing the hunting or the gathering for you. You've got builders, you've got people bringing you food, you've got, it's relatively safe. You don't have to spend all day watching your back and waiting for wild animals to attack or enemy tribes. You've got walls around your city. When you get to that stage, some people, not everyone, but some people find that they have a lot of time on their hands. Maybe their job isn't quite as hard. Maybe they've managed to gather a lot of resources and money, and now they can sit back. And our first philosopher, Thales, is someone who fits in with that perfectly. So that's a good question. So philosophers can come from around this area. Yes. So philosophers, they can come from all around the world, really. It's a bit of a, this guy Thales, he's called the first ever philosopher because he's the first one in recorded history. But I don't honestly think he was the first person to sit around and think, because, people must have done that for generations. But he is the first one that we give that name philosopher to. Put this in scale of time, we're talking here about, where are we thinking? So Confucius, the Chinese guy that we saw a month ago, he was active about 50 years to 100 years after these guys. So China wasn't long to catch up if we think of Confucius as their first philosopher. But some people say that actually there were philosophers in China before that, ancient Egypt before that. So he gets the title of first philosopher, but maybe don't take it too seriously. I don't know. Certainly the first of the Western line. Now, all the philosophers we're going to look at today, they also have a different title. Our first three are from the Milesian school, but we can call all four of the philosophers today pre-Socratic, which means they all came before Socrates. Now, Socrates is kind of a big deal in philosophy, and one day we'll do Socrates in one of these. But he's the famous one. He's the philosopher that everyone's heard of, that everyone kind of has an idea about. And so the history of philosophy often starts with him. So these philosophers, even though they came chronologically before him, they're often called pre-Socratic, just to show that they came before Socrates. That doesn't mean they're all the same. They haven't all got the same ideas, but they're all time-wise before him. Yes, that's a good way of looking at it. Yes, we'll call it BP, maybe. Yes, or BS, yeah, before Socrates, yeah, instead of BC. That works. I like it. Yeah, now that's a good point. Robin here is saying that the person who made the first stone tool was the first philosopher, and I agree with you. Yes, this is someone who obviously sat down, scratched their head, and thought, "Hang on, there must be a better way of cutting that wood or whatever they built the first stone tool for." And yeah, that is basic level philosophy, isn't it? As well, true. Yeah. But let's not take too much away from Thales. Here he is, the first philosopher, Thales of Miletus. Now, Thales is in the perfect position to be a philosopher. Not only does he live in a relatively peaceful part of the world, Miletus isn't important. You've probably never heard of the place. It's not a massive culture. It's not a really rich city or powerful city. It's just a little town in the back end of Turkey, which, no one famous or important comes from there. Everyone famous and important is running around killing Persians in Athens or in Sparta, or, dancing around in Athens, literally. Down in Miletus, life's pretty simple. Most people grow olives or fish. But there is one man who stands out. His name is Thales. He is referred to as incredibly handsome. I mean, I'll let you make your own decision based on this later drawing, but apparently he was a stunner. He was also incredibly rich. which means that he had time to settle down. And his philosophy actually helped him make money too. Thales also was the kind of guy who, he was interested in things. He was a curious man. And he'd spent a lot of time, because he was so rich, he'd been down to Egypt and he'd spent a few years there studying what at the time was cutting edge knowledge. He knew all about astronomy, the planets, the stars, that kind of thing. And he knew all about geometry, so the mathematical properties of shapes. And he may well also have been to the mystery schools and the mystery cults of Egypt, which by their very name, in definition, they are very mysterious. Strange people in pyramids, I imagine, dancing around with snakes and teaching each other the secrets of the universe. So he may be in a little outback town, but he's well traveled and he kind of knows his stuff. And he really started to think about, well, existence. What is everything made of? Does everything living have something in common or not? But before we go into that question, that big question, we'll go for the other two simpler ones here on the screen. So I'd like to see what if you have any ideas here. Do you know, and try and use your scientific knowledge. This is a time when scientific knowledge was varied, but you should be more intelligent than Thales, really. If you do know, put an answer in the chat. Why do olives grow better in some years than others? And how do magnets work? If you can explain either of those, I would love to see your explanation. To be honest, I have no idea how magnets work. I'm not much of a scientist myself, so maybe some of you do know. I'd like to see what you come up with. Now, as you're thinking of those answers, and hopefully writing some in, Thales, he's sat around, and he lives in a time when most of the big problems of life have been solved but by religion. The stories of the Greek gods are there. People believe in the Greek gods. They believe that, if bad things happen, it's because the gods hate you. If good things happen, it's because the gods like you. The best way to make the gods like you is to sacrifice animals to them, keep them all like that. Thales is interesting because he starts to question this, whereas most people just take that as granted. Yes, the gods exist. Thales says, actually, they probably don't. Or at least they don't exist in the same way as you think they do. And there's probably some kind of natural process and logic behind the world, which is quite a groundbreaking idea, really. He's not just going to take the stories for granted. He's going to start asking questions about how things work. So let's see what answers we've got here. So about the olives, some olives grow better in some years because of climate. That's a good answer. We've got weather conditions and animal levels there, that kind of thing. Okay, yes, yeah, whether they're being eaten or not. Nutrients in the soil and better or worse weather. Yeah, you guys are definitely more intelligent than Thales. Thales, to be honest, or at least the people around this time, they had no idea why sometimes olives grow well and sometimes olives don't. So most people, they figured if it was a bad year for olive growing, they just hadn't prayed enough. If it was a good year for olive growing, it means that the gods of olives are happy and, they've given them the reward. Thales, though, he notices something. He's looking around and he starts to work out that on the years when it's a really rainy spring, so a lot of water falls down in the spring, that summer, there's always a really big olive crop. In the years where there isn't much rain in spring, there's not much of an olive crop. Now, maybe a better man than Thales would have shared this information, but he doesn't. What he does is he takes his observation of the world around him, which anyone could have made, to be fair. Anyone could have put those two things together, but it was Thales that did it first. He realizes, hang on, it's all to do with rainfall. So one year, there's a particularly wet spring, like really wet. It just rains the whole time. Yes, it would have taken him a few years to work this one out. This is true. Yeah, he would have had to have properly been thinking about this. But one year he takes a gamble. It's a rainy spring, really wet, and he thinks there's definitely going to be a big olive crop this year. So he starts going around Miletus, and he starts offering, because he's a rich man already, he starts offering a lot of money to people for their olive presses, the things that you squash the olives with to make olive oil. Which is really important in the Greek world. And he buys up every single olive press in the town. Now he's got like a warehouse just full of these olive presses. No one else in Miletus has one. Now, sure enough, when summer comes, there's a bumper olive crop, and the people, they're just, people are just swimming in olives. There's so many of them, and everyone wants to crush their olives. And this is when Thales pipes up and says, huh, don't have an olive press, eh? How about you use mine? That'll just be, 50 quid or whatever he said back then in Greek money. And he made an absolute fortune because he knew exactly what was going to happen and no one else did. So just through his powers of observation, he managed to basically take advantage of the people of Miletus and make himself even richer in the process. And that might be the first real philosophical breakthrough, being able to look at the world around you and not just put it down to stories and myth, but to start getting a bit scientific about the thing. So here's some good ideas about our next one. A lot of people putting ideas about magnets. So let's see. Magnets work with the positive and negative charges. The positive charge pushes out, the negatively charged pulls in. That's why positives repel negative and repel. Oh, I see. Yes. Felicity here. There are quite a few magnetic metals such as iron and nickel. Yeah, I don't think they. Back in the Greek times, they knew of metal. They knew of different types of metal. I don't know if they knew of, they certainly didn't know of iron or nickel. Iron hadn't been invented yet. This is still the Bronze Age, or maybe, actually, no, maybe there is iron by this point. Yes, Bronze Age would have been a bit earlier, so maybe they knew of iron. Particles that attract each other. So when two magnets that are close together, they all snap together. That makes sense. So we're talking about particles going on here. First Steve Jobs, yes he is. Positive and negative charges. Okay. Now, Thales had no idea about positive, negative charges or particles or atoms or anything like that. So he observed and he used his skills of observation to work out how magnets work. He looked around him, all around, his hometown, and he realized that a lot of things move. Yeah. And he thought, okay, well, there's lots of moving things. Magnets move. Yeah, you put them together, they go together. Yeah, really hard to pull apart. There's a lot of things that move. And he thought, well, okay, what do all those things that move have in common? Well, he says, they're all alive. They all have a soul. Therefore, magnets must be like the other living things, and they must be alive and have a soul. So, how do magnets work? Soul magic. Boom. Done. Not very scientific, but in a way quite impressive. Yeah, it's the wrong answer, but it does show that this man is thinking. He's using observations of the world around him to work out what's going on. Okay, he got it wrong, but at least he's having a go. He still gets to be called the first philosopher. Now, this ties in with his idea of what things are made of. What are living things made of? And this ties into our concept of monism or monism. Now, in the Greek world, there were 4 elements: earth, water, air, and fire. The idea of monism, mon or mono being one, is that that all things must be made out of one of these elements. Okay, I'm afraid, Max, that cheese is not an element. Close, but no cigar. So yes, we've got 4 elements, excluding cheese: earth, water, air, and fire. The idea behind monism is that everything in existence is made out of one of these, one. Yeah. So for Thales, he decided that everything was made out of water. It's just water. And this sounds a bit weird, but again, he's using his science and his powers of observation and thinking to get behind this. He notices that lots of things are changing all the time. Yeah, things change state. Yeah, things are alive, things die. It gets hot, then it gets cold. Things are always changing. And yes, Felicity, he is kind of right in a way. There's lots of water in living things. This is true. He also notices that one thing that all living things have in common, from bugs to trees to people to animals, is that they all seem to need water to survive. If they can't drink, they die. Yeah, and that's quite a big, this ties back to his idea of the olives. Yeah, he notices that water helps things grow, plants as well as humans. So he comes to the conclusion, well, everything then must be made of water. It's just in different states. Now, everyone knows that water comes in 3 distinct varieties, at least in the ancient world, they knew this. Sometimes it can be solid, ice. You find that on the mountains. It can be liquid, like it is in the sea or the rivers. And then if you make it hot, it turns into vapor and it floats around. So if we take a human being then, maybe a human being is just some water that's in a different state. Yeah, maybe it's somewhere between solid and liquid. Is human. Yeah, if we get the water right, it just forms a human being, something like that. So everything living is made of water. Now, this would lead to arguments in the Milesian school for sure. Not the fact that monism is right, because everyone believed in monism. The difficulty in the arguments we're going to see is that different philosophers thought that it was a different one of these elements that everything was made of. Yeah. Now, some people pointed out here that yes, human beings are composed of what, 80% water or whatever, more than 70%. Yeah. So to be fair, yeah, humans do need water to survive. He wasn't too far off. It's a good point, but maybe not quite accurate. You know, so Thales, he certainly doesn't go down in history as the best philosopher, but he's the first philosopher, so give him some slack. The real impressive thing about Thales, I guess, is that every single other philosopher we're going to look at and have looked at so far, they're building on the work of other philosophers that came before them. Yeah, they've got something to push back against and come up with new theories. Thales doesn't. Thales is on his own. He's a crafty individual who's making up philosophy on the spot and using it to his financial advantage sometimes. Interesting, Nathaniel. Interesting. So now Thales has a pupil. Same town. We're still in Miletus, so this is still the Milesian school. And his pupil, his young protege, is called Anaximander. Now, Anaximander, he likes Thales' style, he likes Thales' ideas, but he doesn't just follow him completely. He riffs off those ideas. He kind of goes with it. Yeah. And the two questions that I'd like to have a go at here whilst I'm rattling on, see if you can come up with answers to these two questions. How did the first human survive? And why does the Earth not fall? Now, that first problem, I'll explain that one a little bit. How did the first human survive? Well, everyone knows, says Anaximander, that babies are rubbish. Yeah, he didn't mean that in a mean way. He just meant it in a truthful way. You put a baby, you just take a baby, you leave it on the ground without bothering it. Eventually, probably in not much time at all, it will just die. Yeah, it's not going to get up, start walking around, feeding itself, clothing itself, getting a job. They're babies. So Anaximander has a problem here. All human beings start as babies. Yeah. So at some point, the first human beings must have just been a bunch of babies. Why didn't they all just die? Yeah. How come you could have a bunch of babies hanging around and they all somehow grow up into adults without just dying? Now, this was a real hard philosophical question for Anaximander. Remember, this is the time before any kind of evolutionary theory or anything. But yeah, this was his problem. How did the first humans survive? How do we make it so that there's adult humans when everyone knows that adults have to be babies at some point? Kind of a tricky situation, this question. Interesting answers here. Okay, I'll give you some time to come up with some answers. Now, his second problem that he has is, why does the Earth not fall down? Now, in some ways, Anaximander was ahead of his time, and otherwise he was very much of his time. This is a map of the world, as drawn, a modern version of course, as drawn by Anaximander. The world, as you will notice, is flat and round. It has three continents, Europe, Asia, and Libya, which would be North Africa. In the middle of that is the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, then you've got the Black Sea. You can kind of see how that works with Europe. Here's Italy. I mean, that's not too bad, I suppose. There's Spain. Here would be the Gates of Hercules, the Gibraltar right here. And then the river just goes on until you hit ocean, and then, of course, you fall off the edge of the world. Okay? That's, to Anaximander, what the world looks like, but he's got a real problem. I like to imagine he tried this out with plates. He sort of like held up a plate and just sort of let it go and saw what happened. And every time, of course, he would have seen that, oh, it falls to the floor and it smashes. So why isn't the world? Why isn't the Earth? Why isn't that falling down? This was his problem. So let's see what kind of answers you've got. I see that we've got some ideas in the chat here. Let's see. So is he saying that people survived by hunting? Although how would a baby hunt? Ooh, ooh. We've got Rebecca. Monkeys looked after the babies. That's a good one. That would fit with our modern idea of evolution, I suppose. Nathaniel's going old school. The gods raised the people. That could be an answer. Um, Felicity putting it a good way here. They evolved from apes, so their parents, who were apes, would have looked after them. Yes, yes, yes. That sort of fits with our current idea, doesn't it? Um, yeah. Okay. Okay. Um, so our first problem for Anaximander, it all comes down to, again, he's been taught by Thales, look around you. The answers will be there. Ooh, just pay attention, young Padawan. So Anaximander looks around him and he comes up with a perfectly logical explanation. Oh, if you're asking where the recording will be, I will email it to you at the end. Yeah. Now, the perfectly logical explanation comes about by Anaximander looking at the world around him, looking out to the sea, and he notices fish. Now, fish, they're all swimming around really nicely. They live in the water, and Anaximander's a man of the world. He's eaten a fish before. He thinks, fish are really soft inside, really soft. And then he goes a bit further. He reckons you could probably keep a baby in a fish. Yeah, it'd probably fit about right. It's nice and soft in there. That baby would be secure. So his theory as to how the first humans survived was that, well, they were born inside inside a fish. The fish swam around until they grew up a bit, and then the fish came to shore and just sort of went and ejected the babies or the toddlers by this point onto the land, who were then old enough to go around and do some hunting and gathering and stuff. Yeah, as I said, these might not be the best philosophers, but they got style. So our second problem here, the Earth doesn't fall. Imogen and Luke have got an answer here. The Earth doesn't fall because of some weird gravity space stuff that Einstein talked about. Unfortunately, Anaximander had no concept of, well, space or gravity or Einstein. So there you go. Um, the Earth is flying up. That's the answer from Gabriel here. It's just the Earth keeping up with you. That could be an idea. Yeah, okay. So we now know, of course, because of gravitational pulls, that, well, we're not in we are moving because the universe is expanding, but we're keeping in orbit around the sun. Yeah, the key in science is that our country is a sphere. It's not a flat disk, and it's being pulled in by the gravitational pull of the sun, and so we orbit around the sun. That kind of makes sense to us today. Anaximander didn't know this. Anaximander came to the idea that actually the reason we don't fall down is because there is no down. He believed that the Earth was in the middle of the universe, or, the world. I don't know what word he would have used for it. We'll say universe. So because the Earth is in the middle of the universe, bang, slap in the middle, then there's no up, down, left, or right, because every direction is equal away from it. Therefore, because it can't figure out which way is down, it cannot fall. Yeah? Because you can only fall if you can fall downwards. If you don't know where down is, you're not falling, are you? You're just going to hang around in complete balance in the middle of everything. Now, this makes sense, but this does lead to another problem. I can't fall. The reason this leads to a problem, of course, is then he looked up in the sky and saw loads of stars, planets, that weren't falling also. And so he came up with this idea that, okay, everything then must be rotating and revolving, like giant wheels. He didn't think that the bodies in the sky were spherical. He thought they were wheels. And they are rotating around the Earth. And because they are rotating in their wheel-like fashion, the point of them that is closest to the Earth is always changing. And so because they're constantly changing like that, they never get a chance to fall down towards the Earth because they're confusing themselves by going round and round. So in Anaximander's world, we're living on a disk that is stubbornly refusing to fall because it can't decide which way is down, and everything else is flying around us in a wheel-like system, which means that it's too confused to fall too, and therefore, voila, everything holds together. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Modern science has suggested that Anaximander may be wrong, but I still like his style again. I've got a question here. How would a fish keep a toddler in its mouth unless it was a shark? Well, it's right down in the belly of the fish. Yeah, the softest part. That's where the babies grow. And of course, it only had to happen once, because once the first humans grew into adults, then they didn't need the whole fish system anymore. So, yeah. Now, Anaximander was also a monist, although I'm going to break my own rule now. He did believe that everything was made up of one thing, but he didn't quite agree in the four elements. He believed that the four elements existed, for sure. He wasn't an idiot. But what he did think was that there might be some kind of fifth element, which he called the boundless, which is kind of like, I don't know, different people have tried to translate this in different ways, but something like the eternal or the limitless or the never ending. He believed that there was some kind of energy out there that everything was made of, which, you know, the universe is made of, and it's this kind of thing which everyone is a part of. He believed that, you know, what was going on up there was kind of mirrored down below. So the space, I don't know if he'd called it space, but space and the night sky was just mirroring what's happening on the planet, and the planet is mirroring the space, and it's all held together by this ineffable force called the Boundless. Interesting, yes. Gabriel, he may well be the first Jedi. He's all about the force, yes. Yes, the force of creation. Yeah. Now, this is an idea that might be familiar to like modern religious people. You know, if you talk to Christians there and you say, well, you know, what is the essence of the universe, they might say something like spirit, yeah, or the love of God, or something like that. So it's not totally far out. The problem with Anaximander is that it's really hard to understand exactly what he meant when he said the boundless. As I say, different interpretations of his work suggest that he might have meant different things. So it's hard for me to give you a definitive answer as to what he meant. You know, understanding fire, water, earth, and air is a bit simpler than trying to understand the boundless. You might want to think of it like Captain Planet. In that old cartoon, they had the five superheroes had magic rings, one of earth, one of air, one of water, one of fire. And there's a fifth one who had a special ring called Heart. That's it, Gabriel. And the heart ring could let him talk to monkeys, which was, so maybe this is it. You know, the boundless is like Captain Planet's monkey chatting friend. Maybe, I don't know. No, there's a good point there. Thank you, Chan. Just because Christians believe the universe, they also believe in science, of course. Yes, yes. Modern religious people would say, yes, there is spirit, but there is also science. The Milesian school is saying, look, we're trying to get rid of all that spirit stuff, and we're trying to talk about the pure science. Unfortunately, the science is a bit basic. Offensive, I know. All right, let's go to our third one. So Anaximander, he has a pupil in turn. Yeah, same city, still in Miletus, and that's Anaximenes. Oh, I can never say his name. He does have an odd nose, yes, and he had similar thoughts to the others. Again, he was thinking, what are living things made of? He's a monist, but he has a different idea to both Thales and Anaximander. He's going to pick a different thing that the world is made of. But two questions for you here. See if you can tell me the real answer behind these two. What are rainbows and what are earthquakes? Rainbows, earthquakes. Now, I'm hoping some of you guys know the answer to these. Anaximenes, he came up with answers for himself, but as you probably guessed by now, his answers might be a bit strange. But this guy, he's very much concerned. He really does take the teachings of the Milesians who came before him, and he brings them into more extreme focus. Anaximander spends a lot of time thinking about the stars and the universe. Thales is thinking about sort of the practical use of the world around him, maybe, you know, how can I make some money out of this? Whereas Anaximenes, we'll call him Big A. This guy, he's questioning how natural phenomena are occurring. He's really interested in how nature works. So there you go. So we're getting some answers in here. So rainbows are made by light reflecting through raindrops. Rainbows are light bouncing off water droplets. Rainbows are bent light. Yeah, okay, some good answers there. Okay. And to be honest, Big A here, he wasn't too far out. He reckoned that rainbows were formed by the sun bouncing off of clouds, which isn't too far. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's not bad. He is at least thinking about sunlight. He's got that in the mix, and he has got water droplets in there because, of course, clouds are made up of water droplets. So he's kind of right. He wouldn't have understood the concept that we know that rainbows are disks, but not bad going for one of these guys. Now, your answers here. Earthquakes are because of tectonic plates moving underneath our feet, yeah. Moving the Earth's crust around. Thank you, Imogen and Luke, yeah. Yeah, the tectonic plates rubbing together, Rebecca, that's it, yeah. Yeah, this works, okay. So we know, and we now know what tectonics are, at least basically. Anaximenes, not so much. But he used his powers of deduction to work it out. Yeah, he's not just going to listen to the gods. The story at the time is quite straightforward. There is a god of earthquakes. His name is Poseidon, and oh, sorry, Daniel. Yes, in the situation that he's in, he's using his knowledge. He's looking around the place. They're told that Poseidon causes earthquakes. He's the god of the sea and horses and earthquakes, amongst other things. And so an earthquake is just him being angry. But of course, the Milesian school isn't going to take this stuff lying down. No. Instead, what Anaximenes does is he decides to use his eyes, and he goes out and he's wandering about, and he notices that when it rains a lot of mud is created. Yeah, the ground gets kind of slushy. Think of like the hot area of Turkey, on the Mediterranean coast. We're talking about quite a lot of bare soil anyway. The mud gets all churned up, gets all gets all mushy, all muddy. Yeah, and then the sun comes out, and what happens? He watches this with his own eyes. The sun heats up the ground, and the ground cracks. So obviously, that's what an earthquake is. After rain, the sun must just dry up the mud in such a way as to form massive cracks that shake the earth. Yeah? And you can kind of see where he's coming from. He has no idea what's going on below the surface, but he uses his mind. Yes, he got it wrong. Very much so, he got it wrong. But he's using his powers of deduction and logic and his own experience rather than trusting on other people to do his thinking for him, i.e. the priests of Greece. So quite a good place to be. Now, his theory of monism, have I got, oh no, we haven't got it there yet. His theory of monism is that everything is made out of air. And the way he explains this is that he takes Thales' idea, yeah, everything needs water to survive, but also everything needs air, yeah? And air is way more flexible than water, and it can change shape really easily. So maybe everything must be made of air, which, he's more interested in like weather patterns and stuff, and he would have been quite interested in wind. So I suppose it all makes sense, really. Yeah, Sherlock Holmes, Robin. Yeah, definitely, that's it. Yeah, he's definitely out there, and so he believes the idea of everything being made of one thing. He just disagrees with exactly what that thing is. Everything to him is air, everything to Anaximander is wind, the Boundless, and everything to Thales is water. Three different ideas, but they're still kind of the same idea. Yeah? Now, we're going to break my rule here, because we were going to talk about the Milesians, but there's a little town just up the road from Miletus. Here we are. I've got my map here again that I'll show you here. Now, if Miletus is here, then the next town where this guy comes from is Ephesus. So not very far away at all. Yeah, there would have been roads connecting these up, and people from Miletus and people from Ephesus, they would mingle quite freely. Now, it's unclear, as to whether this guy actually met any of the Milesian philosophers. I tend to believe that he probably did, or at least he knew of them. But this guy, his name is Heraclitus, and he's not part of the Milesian school because he doesn't come from Miletus, but I've put him in here anyway because he's definitely following the same kind of ideas. Now, this guy is, well, he's not the kind of guy you'd want to hang out with. Yeah. Oh, Daniel, you're already on to the answering the questions. Good, good, good. Yeah, all right. I'll set up the questions, then we'll come back to his little backstory. So our questions for him that he was concerned with: do some things stay the same? What is the opposite of day? Okay, it's straightforward, I guess. And what is everything made of? Again, pops up into Heraclitus's brain. Yeah, so he's trying to work out what everything's made of as well. We've got some answers. This is good. Now, the reason some people think that Heraclitus probably didn't mix with the Milesian school is because although he didn't live far away, he seems to be dead against travelling. He doesn't like leaving anywhere. Sometimes Heraclitus is known as the riddler or the riddle maker or the riddle master, something like that. He would purposefully write down his philosophy in the most confusing and complicated way, because he believed that everyone else other than him was stupid. He didn't want to be around them. He thought they were beneath him. No one was as clever as Heraclitus, and so he's not going to hang around with them. This meant that he very rarely left his own small town of Ephesus, and very rarely left his own home unless he really had to. Ooh, good is he. Now, this can be shown in an extreme fashion because Heraclitus is invited to go and visit and to give his teachings to the king of Persia. Oh, the mighty king of Persia himself, the ruler of the greatest empire that had ever lived up to this point. He was sent a nice letter. The emperor has heard of your great brain and how wise and amazing you are. Will you please come to Iran, it would have been, to visit? Heraclitus writes back a letter saying, no, I'm not coming to Iran. I'm not going to see the emperor because I'm more intelligent than him. And anything I said to him, he wouldn't understand anyway. I'm just that good. So, that's Heraclitus in a nutshell. He's not the easiest guy to get along with. In fact, one day there's a problem in Ephesus. The town is suffering from some kind of economical problems. And the people, they can't figure out what to do. And they decide, well, we'll go and ask Heraclitus. He's the cleverest man around. We'll go and ask him to help us with our problems. They all tromp round to Heraclitus' house. They knock on the door. They say, Heraclitus, here's our problems. Can you help us fix them? Heraclitus turns around and says, no, it's not my fault you're a bunch of idiots. Yeah, I know the answers, but I'm not sharing them with you. What do I look like? An idiot? I'm no idiot. Goodbye. Slams the door in their faces. They would have made him mayor of the town. But no, he's not going for it. So he's a difficult, prickly character. He's a bit arrogant, for sure, as Heraclitus thinks he's better than everyone else. But let's see. Can you beat Heraclitus? Can you give me the real answer here? So I can see there's some answers in the chat. So our first one, do things stay the same? Okay, so we've got a lot. Oh, okay. So we'll go for what is the opposite of day? People are saying night. Night seems to be the general answer here. Yeah, okay. What is everything made of? People are talking about these crazy things called atoms. Now, to be fair, the concept of atoms are not that far in the future. There's a philosopher called Democritus who will come, 50 to 100 years later, who will come up with the concept of atoms. Not quite the scientific idea that we use today, but still, he will coin that phrase of the atom, the idea that things are made up of tiny blocks. Yeah. Also hashtag strings. Not sure if that's right either. Okay. It depends. Here's one from Daniel. When it comes to do some things stay the same, it depends on whether you are religious. If you are, you believe that God is eternal and unchanging. If not, then everything eventually changes. That's a good way of looking at it. I like that. A good question from Marina. But what are atoms made of? Probably water or air or earth or fire. Yeah, that sounds right. So let's see how Heraclitus would have answered these questions. The first one, do some things stay the same? Heraclitus would have looked around him and said, absolutely, definitely not. Nothing stays the same. Everything is constantly shifting and changing. Everything. Nothing stays the same. And there's a reason for that, and it comes in with his idea of opposites. What is the opposite of day? Well, night. You all got that right. And Heraclitus got this too. But he thought that absolutely everything had an opposite. So hungry and full. happy and sad, night and day, good and bad. Oh, I'm being told that atoms are made of quarks. Yes, there you go. Um, oh, I've lost it. So everything has an opposite. You know, if you think of any state of being, it must have an opposite. Therefore, nothing can stay the same, because if there's an opposite of something, it must always be able to be its opposite. Yeah. So let's try and unpack this a little bit more. Let's use our coin and our flame here as a bit of a help. So there's three concepts here which Heraclitus brings together to explain why the world is changing constantly. He ties into that this idea of opposites, and he ties in his own version of monism, which is that everything is made of fire. Okay, let's put this together. So everything has an opposite. Here we've got a coin to represent that. It's got two sides. Now, you can either, if you flip a coin, it's going to come down on one side or the other. And before you get crafty and start telling me that it can sometimes balance on the side, be quiet. One side or the other. Not having any messing. Now, we'll come back to Pocahontas in a minute, no worries. The coin flips, it either lands on heads or tails. But all things, says Heraclitus, has its opposite. So you're either hungry or full, that's a good example, or happy or sad, that's another good one. Now, in his belief, everything is trying to get to its opposite. So every time you flip a coin, it's trying to get to both sides at once, which is why it spins around uncontrollably until it lands. Every time you are hungry, your body is pulling you towards eating and making yourself full. Every time you are sad, your body is trying to get you to cheer up. Now, that's a bit vague in today's world, I know, when we start bringing in modern concepts, but it kind of works. You know, every day is eventually flipped into night, and every night is eventually conquered by day. He sees these opposites constantly in motion. And so he thinks if everything's trying to get to its opposite, that means that everything has to be in a state of movement. Every person is constantly, you know, trying to get to the other state. You know, I'm tired, I'm asleep, or I'm awake, I'm asleep. Why don't people, when they're asleep, just stay asleep? You know, you're not thinking, are you? So Heraclitus would have thought, well, it must be because there's a natural pull to become awake. And why does everyone who's awake eventually get tired? Because there's a natural pull towards sleep. So if everything's constantly moving between one and the other, that means that things must be constantly changing. You can't have a stable world when it's made up of opposites that are trying to attract each other or flip to one to the other. And most of life is spent on the cusp. It's spent with the humans. We are in the middle of the coin flip. Yeah, the ultimate coin flip, of course, are the opposites between life and death. And you could say maybe at the moment of birth, we are truly alive. At the moment of death, we are truly dead. The rest of our life is just that coin spinning in the air. You know, where are we going to come down? And ultimately, we're going to come down dead. But it's that movement between life and death, between wake and sleep, that is constantly going on. And that's why everything's changing. Now, this, I suppose, logically led him to Heraclitus, led him to the belief that everything must be made of fire. Because fire is the most changeable of things. I mean, we've already talked about how air is very flexible and how water changes constantly. But to Heraclitus, fire is this power behind change. Yeah, you put some wood on a fire, the fire will turn that wood to ash. You put your sausage on the fire, your sausage will be cooked. You know, it changes states of other things. So it kind of makes sense if we think of it like that. If everything is constantly trying to change state, therefore everything is in this constant, you know, everything must be changed by something. What is the element that changes things the most? It's fire. Therefore we must just be big balls of fire, or should I say great balls of fire, being, you know, spreading around, moving, changing everything around us and changing our forms. That is the secret to life, the universe, and everything is eternally on fire. He's a clever man. A very clever man. Let's go back to Pocahontas, though, because I don't know how many of you out there have seen the film Pocahontas. Sometimes I feel like everyone must have seen the Disney classics, but I'm always surprised at how few people have. The reason Pocahontas is here is because in that film, good, some people have, this is good. In that film, Pocahontas, she she uses a direct quote from Heraclitus. She steals his idea. She says, a good question here. How can you burn yourself? Yes, if everything was made of fire, surely we would be inflammable. We wouldn't notice if we set fire to ourselves. Maybe Heraclitus thought that fire was in the core of everything, but maybe not everything. Yeah. Wouldn't it make more sense to say that we are on the fire, not made of it? Possibly, we are. Yeah, we're on fire. We're not made of fire. But it's the idea between Heraclitus and fire is this idea of a changing substance, something that pushes change forwards. Water is changed, but it's changed by fire. Fire melts ice. Fire turns water into steam. Air can be made heavier or lighter based on how warm it is. So to Heraclitus, he says, look, everything's changing all the time. Therefore, everything must have the essence of fire within it, because that's the thing that's changing. So the universe is essentially fire. Yeah. That's a good question from Felicity as well. If you are made of fire, how are you cold? Because fire is constantly changing things. So it's making you cold. I don't know. Try not to think too deeply on it. Or do think too deeply on it. I don't know. This is philosophy. Go nuts. Yeah. Now, back to Pocahontas, though. Pocahontas says in the film that you can never step in the same river twice. And this is a line that she directly stole. I mean, I say she, she's a fictional character who's been created by animators, but you get my point. In the film, she directly steals this quote from Heraclitus, because Heraclitus said, you can never step in the same river twice. And this is because, if we think about it, we walk to a river, we put our foot in it. Our foot gets wet. We pull our foot out of the river. We now, I don't know, walk around for a minute. I don't know, a second, doesn't really matter. We then put our foot back in the river. Everything's now different. Yeah, because all of those, and he wouldn't have used the word atoms yet, but all those parts of the river, all the water in the river, the stuff that you put your foot into has now traveled on down the river, yeah? That water that was there when you put your foot in the first time is now somewhere downriver, or maybe even out to sea. So the water that you're actually putting your foot in now is a different set of water. Therefore, it's not the same river in that sense, yeah? Everything is constantly changing. If I put my foot in one river one day and then put it in there the next, it's a completely different river. And he went further than this. He said, we shouldn't expect people to be, constant or reliable or steady individuals. Yeah, I shouldn't think to myself, that guy over there is a real nice guy, or likewise, that girl over there is a real mean girl. Because yes, you might meet them on one day and they might be nice or mean, but then you might meet them the next day or the next month or the next year or whatever. They could act very, very differently. People are very changeable, like rivers. Their lives have taken different paths. Even in the course of, a couple of hours, somebody's mood might change quite drastically. Maybe I meet someone and they've just been stung by a bee. I'm going to have a different reaction and interaction with that person than if I come back a couple of hours later and they're eating an ice cream. Yeah, they're probably going to be different kinds of people if we think about it. So Heraclitus was big on saying, look, maybe give people a chance. Now, at the same time, this is the same Heraclitus who basically says that everyone's an idiot. So, I don't know. He intentionally made his writings as complicated as he could to stop the stupid people from trying to read his work. He was very protective over the whole thing. But Heraclitus will ultimately come to a rather interesting end. There's a question here. So, can you step on the same floor twice? I suppose so. He would have said that some things were a bit more solid, but maybe not forever, he would say. The floor would eventually disappear. Now, if you another question here, what if you step in the same part of the river that is where the water that you stepped in has moved to? I see what you mean. So if you chase the river downstream, yeah, and then you put your foot back in the same bit of water, I suppose you could do it. Yeah. Although he would then point to your wet foot and say, hang on, the water that was in that original river is now on your wet foot. So it's still not the same river. There you go. Crafty Heraclitus. Now, unfortunately for Heraclitus, he got ill. He got rather poorly. There he is in a time before the NHS or doctors of any variety, really, or good ones at least. And he gets quite poorly. He starts to get weaker. He's not feeling very good at all. And he does what a normal person might do. He goes to the doctor. He goes off to the doctor. He says, "Doctor, I'm not feeling very well. Have you got any suggestions?" And the doctor makes several suggestions. Yes, do this, drink that, have some sleep, eat this potion, do that. Heraclitus looks at the doctor and says, "You're an idiot. What do you mean? That's the wrong thing to eat. That's the wrong thing to do. What a fool you are." So, do you eat a potion? No, you drink a potion. I'm sorry. He goes to another doctor. "Doctor, I'm feeling very poorly. That idiot over there told me to do this and that and the other, and it's obviously not going to work because he's an idiot." So the next doctor says, "All right, drink this, eat that, stand on your head," whatever the doctor prescribes. Heraclitus just stares at him. "Huh, another idiot." And off he goes to a third doctor who gives him a third set of prescriptions, but Heraclitus, again, what a fool. Now, Heraclitus decides that obviously doctors are not worth the money that he's probably not even paying them, and that instead he should do things his own way. He's going to use his theory of the fire, yeah? So fire changes state. Fire is the power behind changing things from one opposite state to the other. He is stuck in a state of being ill. He needs to get back to the state of being healthy. So he's going to need to put some fire on the job here, yeah? Now, you might know where this is going. Oh no. But you might be surprised. Now, he's not a complete idiot, Heraclitus. He's not just going to go and set himself on fire or something. He knows that he's got a highly flammable beard. Instead, he thinks, okay, I need heat. That's what I need. So he starts moving around Ephesus, the town, and he starts gathering up as much cow dung as he possibly can. And he makes a great big pile of cow dung. Huge it is. He puts it outside in the hot sun. Yeah, you can imagine it, this great big pile of poo just cooking there in the sun. He then gets inside the pile, oh yes, right up to his neck, completely covered in cow poo. Ooh. Now his plan is that the sun will heat the cow poo, the fire within the cow poo will then heat up his body, which will mean that he changes states from one opposite to the other, from ill to healthy. Yes, science. Now, Heraclitus will die in that pooey cocoon in the sun. He sits there all day, getting hotter and hotter, until he just stops living, as you probably would do if you cooked yourself in cow dung. So in that case, he was proven wrong, poor Heraclitus. So as a general bit of advice, don't dress yourself in cow poo and sit in the sun. It's not good. It might help you get from one opposite state to the other, but it's going to be the opposite states of living and dead. Yeah, it's the journey you're going to make there. A good question there. What illness did he have? I mean, we have no idea because this is a time before proper doctors. So I don't know. I could be anything really. I mean, he could have just been very old by that point. I don't know. That's a good point. Yeah, medicine can change your state. Yeah, so I mean, and that is what we're doing. He did change his state, didn't he, Olwen? Yes, he changed his state from alive to dead. So in some ways, he was a genius. In other words, not so much. So there you are. That's our little trip through the Milesian school, plus Heraclitus, because he's just too cool to leave out. And yeah, you might not be particularly impressed today by the level of philosophy on display here. It's not the best stuff in the world, but it is the core of philosophy. The core of philosophy is asking the questions that everyone else thinks they already have an answer to. Everyone else knew where humans came from. The gods made them. Everyone knew where earthquakes came from. The gods did it. Everyone knew, what we were made of. God stuff. Yeah. These guys, they stood back and they thought about it and they came up with different ideas. And yes, they might be a bit silly, but we have a lot to thank them for, because eventually philosophers will come along and they will build on their ideas and they will make them far better. So there you go.